She was holding my baby. Not looking at her. Just holding her. The way you'd hold something you didn't want to drop, but didn't want to touch. My daughter was 4 days old. I was still in the hospital bed. My mother was standing near the window, and my baby was making that small sound, that almost cry, and my mother didn't move closer. She didn't speak. She didn't even look down. She just stood there, very still, like she was waiting for someone to take the baby back. I watched her for a long time. Nobody else was in the room. And then she placed my daughter in the bassinet, not gently, not roughly, just placed her, the way you'd set down something you were done carrying. She turned back to the window. My baby started to cry. My mother didn't turn around. That's when I realized something was very wrong. My name doesn't matter. What matters is this. I was 29 years old, 3 weeks past a serious car accident, 4 days past an emergency C-section, and lying in a hospital bed trying to understand what I had just seen. My recovery was supposed to be simple. Rest. Monitoring. My husband, Daniel, was working reduced hours to be near the hospital. My mother, Sandra, had insisted, actually, on being there to help. She lived 40 minutes away. She had cleared her schedule. She had made it sound like love. In those first days, she was present. She brought food. She spoke to the nurses. She smiled at the right moments. But there were small things. When the nurses asked who the baby looked like, my mother said nothing. When Daniel's father came to visit and held my daughter for 20 minutes, crying quietly, my mother sat in the corner chair and scrolled through her phone. When I asked her once to pick up the baby, just for a moment, while I used the bathroom, she said she had a bad back. She had never mentioned a bad back before. Daniel noticed too. He didn't say much, just a quiet look when my mother left the room one evening without saying goodbye. I asked him what he thought. He said, "She's probably just tired. New babies are overwhelming for everyone." He wasn't wrong. But he also wasn't watching as closely as I was. There was something specific in how my mother looked at my daughter. Or rather, how she didn't look at her. There was no softness. No pulling her close. No instinct. My mother had raised 3 children. She knew how to hold a baby. This wasn't unfamiliarity. This was choice. I started replaying conversations from before the birth. A comment she had made at 7 months. "Are you sure Daniel is ready for this?" A question she had asked twice, in different ways, about whether the pregnancy had been planned. A moment at the baby shower, when she had stood near the gift table instead of near me. None of it had seemed like anything. Now it felt like a pattern. I didn't say a word. I didn't ask her to explain. I didn't tell Daniel about the window moment, not yet. I needed to understand what I was looking at before I reacted to it. So I stopped reacting. And I started watching. On day 6, my mother left her phone on the chair next to my bed while she went to speak with one of the nurses. I wasn't trying to look. But the screen was still lit, and the message was open, and it was long, and the first line was enough to make me read the rest. The message was to my aunt, my mother's younger sister, Carol. They were close. They spoke every day. My mother had written, "The baby doesn't look like the family at all. I've been thinking about what I told you before. I think I was right. She's not going to let this go on much longer. Daniel will figure it out on his own eventually." I read it twice. Then I read the thread above it. The thread went back 11 weeks. In it, my mother had told Carol that she believed, with apparent certainty, that my daughter was not Daniel's biological child. She had built an entire theory. She had mentioned a work trip I had taken 8 months earlier. She had mentioned a colleague of mine whose name she had apparently looked up. She had described what she called the timeline not adding up, though she had no medical knowledge and no actual information. She had never once asked me. She had never raised it with Daniel. Instead, she had spent 11 weeks quietly, methodically poisoning the idea of my daughter in her own family. And she had apparently said something to at least one other person. Carol's response in the thread referenced, "What you told me at Christmas," which meant this had been a topic of family discussion, while I was 8 months pregnant, and did not know it. The part that stayed with me, the part one couldn't put down, was a message from 4 weeks before my daughter was born. My mother had written, "If it comes out the way I think, I won't be involved. I'm not raising another man's child as my grandchild. I've already made up my mind." She had made up her mind. Before my daughter was born. Before she had held her. Before she had seen her. Before there was a single fact in evidence, because there was nothing to base it on. The work trip she referenced was a 2-day conference I had attended with 6 colleagues, 3 of whom were women. There was no affair. There had never been any affair. Daniel and I had been together for 6 years. Our daughter was conceived the month after we bought our house. I knew exactly when, and I knew exactly why. My mother had decided. And then she had come to the hospital with food and smiles and a bad back, and she had placed my 4-day-old daughter in a bassinet without looking at her, and she had stood at the window, and she had waited. I set the phone back on the chair before she returned. She walked back in, picked up the phone without checking it, and asked if I needed more water. I said yes, please. She poured it. I watched her hand. I didn't ask her anything. I didn't let my face change. Confronting her would have ruined everything. That evening, after my mother left, I told Daniel. Not everything. Not yet. I showed him the part that mattered most, the message about not being involved, about not accepting our daughter. I watched him read it. He read it 3 times. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, very quietly, "How long has she thought this?" I told him 11 weeks, at minimum. He nodded slowly. He set the phone down. He looked at our daughter in the bassinet. He said, "Okay. What do you want to do?" That was the moment I understood why I married him. We didn't shout. We didn't call my mother that night. We made a plan. The first thing I did was take screenshots of every message in that thread. I sent them to my own email. I saved them to a folder in cloud storage. I sent the folder link to Daniel. I also texted my grandfather, my mother's father, a man named Harold who is 81 years old and has been the quiet center of our family for as long as I can remember. I didn't explain everything. I just said, "Grandpa, I need to talk to you when I'm out of the hospital. It's important. Please don't mention it to Mom." He responded within 10 minutes, "I'll be here. Take care of yourself and that baby." 3 days later, I was discharged. We did not invite my mother to help with the transition home. I told her the doctors recommended limited visitors for the first 2 weeks due to my recovery. She accepted this without argument. She sent a text that evening saying she hoped I felt better soon, and that she was there if I needed anything. She was performing. And now I could see it clearly. While I recovered at home, I did 3 things. I contacted a family lawyer. Not to file anything immediately, just to understand what I was dealing with. The lawyer was calm and specific. She said that depending on the nature of the damage, emotional, relational, potential financial, there were options. She also said that documentation was everything. I already had it. I called Carol. This was a risk. But I had known Carol my entire life, and there was something in the tone of her messages, a hesitation, a few moments where she had responded with short answers, or changed the subject, that made me think she wasn't as committed to my mother's theory as my mother was. I was right. Carol picked up on the second ring. I told her I had seen the thread. I didn't accuse her of anything. I just said I had seen it, and I needed to know if there was anything else I should know. She was quiet for a very long time. Then she told me that my mother had raised this with 3 other family members. That it had come up at Christmas dinner. That Carol had told her she was wrong and should speak to me directly, but my mother had refused. Carol said she was sorry. She said she hadn't known how to bring it to me. She agreed, when I asked, to write down what she remembered and send it to me in an email. She sent it the next day. Now I had the screenshots. The email. A lawyer. And Carol's account. The last call was to Grandpa Harold. He came to the house on a Tuesday afternoon. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. I laid everything out. I showed him the messages. I showed him Carol's email. I told him what I had seen in the hospital room. He read everything carefully. He didn't rush. When he finished, he folded his hands on the table and looked at me. He said, "I'll call Sandra tonight." Then he said, "I'll make sure the rest of the family hears the truth." I believed him. That Thursday, my mother called me. Her voice was different. Smaller. She said she'd been thinking and she wanted to come by. I said Saturday worked. I didn't tell her who else would be there. They thought it was just another day. It wasn't. On Saturday morning, Daniel's parents arrived at 10. Carol arrived at 10:15. Grandpa Harold arrived at 10:30, which was also when my mother pulled into the driveway. I watched through the window as she got out of the car. She was carrying something, a small gift bag, tissue paper visible at the top. She was dressed carefully. She had prepared for a quiet conversation with her daughter. She was not prepared for what she walked into. There were no raised voices when she came inside. No one stood up to confront her. Harold was sitting in the armchair near the fireplace. Daniel was at the kitchen table. His parents were on the sofa. Carol was standing near the window, the same position, I noticed, where my mother had stood in the hospital room. My mother stopped in the doorway. She looked at Harold first. He said, "Come sit down, Sandra." She sat. I placed my laptop on the coffee table. I opened the thread. I didn't explain it. I turned the screen toward her and let her read. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she said, "That was a private conversation." Grandpa Harold said, "It stopped being private when it reached Christmas dinner." My mother looked at Carol. Carol looked back at her and did not speak. Then Daniel's mother, a woman who had cried when she held our daughter for the first time, who had driven 40 minutes each way just to sit with her for an hour, said very quietly, "I'd like to understand what you were trying to do." My mother didn't answer. What followed was not an argument. It was an accounting. Harold spoke. Carol spoke. I read 2 lines from one of the messages aloud, the one where my mother had said she wouldn't accept our daughter as a grandchild, and then I closed the laptop. I said, "I want you to understand that I have kept everything. I've spoken to a lawyer. I'm not filing anything today. But if you repeat this narrative to anyone, that changes." My mother's face was very still. She said, "I made a mistake." I said, "You made a decision. 11 weeks before your granddaughter was born. That's different from a mistake." She didn't respond. Harold stood up. He said to her, in a tone I had never heard him use before, not angry, just final, "You will not speak about this child that way again. Not to me. Not to the family. Not to anyone. If that's something you can't agree to, then you tell me now and we'll know where things stand." She was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded. She left 20 minutes later. She didn't ask to hold the baby. The gift bag sat on the table by the door. Carol brought it to me after she left. Inside was a small white onesie with a flower on the front. I set it aside. In the weeks that followed, my mother called twice. Both times, she was careful. She didn't reference what had happened. She asked how I was feeling and how the baby was sleeping. I answered. I kept the conversations short. She has met her granddaughter 3 times since then. Each time, Harold has been present. Each time, she has held her properly. There is no warmth there yet. Maybe there won't be. That is something she will have to live with and work toward on her own terms. I don't carry anger about it. That surprised me at first. But I think I understand it now. What I needed was for my daughter to be protected. For the record to be clear. For the people who loved us to know the truth. All of that happened. The lawyer's file is still open, quietly, in case it's ever needed. It hasn't been. My daughter is 4 months old now. She sleeps in her own room. She laughs when Daniel makes a certain face. She holds her head up and looks around like she's trying to understand everything she sees. She is fine. We are fine. That night, everything was quiet.